Okay, so I know this lesson's probably going to be a little draggy. It's a lot of vocabulary, but we've still got to get through it. So if we look at the first word, adjacent angles. So these are two angles that lie in the same plane and have a common vertex and a common side. So I always kind of think of these as neighbors. So they share this point and they share this side. It's kind of like two neighbors sharing a fence. So this would be neighbor 1 and this would be neighbor 2, and they're adjacent angles. The next word is linear pair. So linear pairs are a pair of adjacent angles where the non-common sides form opposite rays. So as you can see, if I label this one 1 and this one 2, they are adjacent. They share this point and they share this side, so this fence, so they're neighbors. And they form a straight line. So that's how we know that they're a linear pair or a line pair. I always think of this as a line pair because they form a straight line. Okay, vertical angles are two non-adjacent angles formed by two intersecting lines. Vertical angles are, and I don't know why that didn't come out right, but vertical angles are congruent. So if I look at this picture, this would be a set of vertical angles, and then this would also be a set of vertical angles, and they have to be the same number. So if angle 1 was 100, then angle 2 would also have to be 100. Complementary angles are two angles whose measure adds up to 90. Now these can be adjacent and they just form a right angle, or they could be separated. So this could be 50 and this could be 40. As long as they add up to 90, they're considered complementary. Supplementary angles add up to 180. Again, they can be adjacent like these up here, and they add up to 180, or they could be separate. So this could be 150 and this could be 30. And again, they just add up to 180. Perpendicular lines, the symbol for perpendicular is an upside down T. And these are line segments or rays that form right angles. So if I look at this picture, this would be a set of right angles. These two down here would be right angles, or I could just have a set of rays that make a right angle. So we consider those perpendicular. And we say that these are just lines that form four right angles and four congruent adjacent angles. Okay, linear pair postulate just says if two angles form a linear pair, then they are supplementary. In other words, if two angles form a line like this, then they have to add up to 180. So these just add to 180. And then the last one here says vertical angles are congruent. So that means if this is 150, then this would be 150. So that's the vertical angles theorem. So that pretty much covers our vocabulary side of things. Now let's take a look at a few examples and see if it kind of makes sense. So if I look at example 1, it says we're going to identify vertical angles in linear pairs. And part A says, are 2 and 3 a linear pair? So remember, we know linear pairs form a straight line. So if I draw a line from this side of 3 and I go up, that did not include all of angle 2. So no, these are not a linear pair. So they have to form a straight line. If I look at letter B, angles 3 and 4, notice that this time, if I look at angle 4 and I look at angle 3, they do make a straight line, so this is a yes. It's much easier, if we were in class, I would show you by putting a piece of paper up against that line. It's a little bit easier to see that way. Okay, the next one says vertical angles. So remember, in the definition, it says vertical angles have to be made by two straight lines. And if I look at this line specifically, that is not a straight line because it's like a broken wing here. So none of these can be vertical angles. So for this one, it would be a no. And for this one, it would be a no. Okay, looking at example 2, says are angles 1 and 2 a linear pair? So again, if we look at angle 1 and 2, and I trace their non-common side, does that make a straight line? No, so these are not a linear pair. If we look at the next problem, it says 4 and 5, are they a linear pair? So again, we're going to look at their non-common side. So this is their common side, but we care about their non-common side. Yes, that makes a straight line. So yes, these are a linear pair. So then we look at the next one, 5 and 3. So if I look at the two lines that make 5 and 3, notice they are straight lines. They are directly across from each other. So this is, yes, they are vertical angles. But if I look at example D here, angle 1, so here is angle 1, and here is angle 3. So notice that these two are not made by two lines. They're actually made by multiple lines. So no, those are not vertical angles. And if you also remember, vertical angles have to be congruent. Angle 1 is much bigger than angle 3, so those would not work. If you kind of remember vertical angles, like they have to basically form an X, and it's kind of like the eyeballs in the X. So that's kind of how I always envision vertical angles, if that helps kind of solidify that at all. Okay, looking at example 3, it says in the diagram, XY bisects angle WXZ. So we need to talk about this word bisect. So bisect means it cuts it in half. It makes the two sides exactly the same. So it's saying that this side of the angle, WXY, is the exact same as this side of the angle, YXZ. So if they're exactly the same, I can set them equal to each other. So 7x minus 7 equals 5x plus 3, and we can solve this. So we're going to subtract 5x from both sides, and then we're going to add 7, so we get 2x equals 10. So that means x has to be 5. And then it says I'm supposed to find angle WXY. So I actually have to find this angle, which means I'm going to plug it in. So 7 times 5 is 35, minus 7 gives me 28. So angle WXY is 28. Then we're going to plug it in for the other side. So if I plug it in for YXZ, 5 times 5 is 25, plus 3 is, again, 28. And if I've done it right, they should be the same answer, so we're good. Okay, the next one's a little bit more complicated. So on this one, it says FGE, so this angle down here, is 5x plus 10. And we're supposed to figure out what x is. Well, if you noticed, up here was a little box, and that little box means that's a right angle. And a right angle is 90 degrees. So 5x plus 10 has to equal 90 degrees. So subtract your 10, and then divide by 5. So you're going to end up with x equals 16. The next one, a little bit harder. You've got two angles now. So it's talking about angle BGC. It says this angle is 16 minus 4. And then it talks about angle CGD, and it says this angle is 2x plus 13. And we're supposed to figure out what x is. But again, it wants this angle to be a right angle, so it wants it to be 90 degrees. So if this whole thing has to be 90 degrees, then that means those have to add up to be 90 degrees. So they have to add up to be 90, which means they are complementary. So we're going to combine our like terms. So we get 18x plus 9 equals 90 degrees. Subtract 9 from both sides. We get 18x equals 81, and then divide by 18, and you should get x equals 4.5. So x would have to be 4.5 in order for that whole angle to be 90 degrees. Okay, we only have one extra problem down here at the bottom. So we're going to find x and y. So the first thing you have to decide is which letter do you have two of? Now that seems kind of weird, but if I look at this, I have an x here and I have an x here. So we have two angles that have an x. So we're going to just solve for x first. So if I look at this, these two angles make a straight line, and a straight line is 180 degrees. So that means that those two angles have to add up to give me 180 degrees. All right, so from here we're going to combine our like terms. So we have 6x plus 108 equals 180. Subtract 108 from each side, we get 6x equals 72. And then divide by 6, you get x equals 12. Well, if x equals 12, then that means this angle at the top here, 2 times 12 is 24. And I know that these two angles have to add up to 180 because they're a straight line. So 180 minus 24 tells me that y has to be 156. So anytime you have two angles that make a straight line, they're going to add up to 180. And anytime you have two angles across from each other, they would be equal to each other. So that's pretty much the gist of the lesson today. You do have a Google form to complete today. It's got some vocabulary stuff and a few problems you're going to have to solve. The ones that you have to solve, you will need to work out on paper. And I'm going to have you go ahead and submit that paper as well that you work these out on. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out by email and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks.